yeah, I think that's, for me, probably the biggest.
I ended up writing a list. I was like, wow, there's a lot of things on both sides. I would say that my experience of sex work is it's not a thing to go into if you have low self-esteem. It's harsh, or it can be harsh. I definitely, I'm gonna start with the negatives and go to the positives so I can end on a positive note. I definitely experienced a lot of fat phobia when I started doing sex work, especially if I turned a client down. I am very lucky and very privileged that even when I felt like I was struggling a lot for money, I still felt very comfortable turning clients down, which not all sex workers have that privilege. And sometimes when I turned clients down, I would get death threats. And being that sex work is illegal, I had nowhere to report those death threats to, because reporting things like that to the police could end in my getting arrested. Or certainly the police keeping my name on file as being a sex worker, which I didn't want to do. So it definitely made me realize how vulnerable I was. And of course, never mind the fact that I'm getting emails and text messages telling me how worthless I am for being fat, or how hideous I was, or detailing lists of, you know, how unattractive I am. So again, and not a thing to do if you feel in any way like you have low self-esteem. It can also feel very isolating. It can be very difficult to talk about having a bad day when you're a sex worker, when you know, the media and public perception is that sex work is either amazing or horrible. Usually if you have a bad time at your job, you can go to your friends and say, oh, I had the worst day at work today, it was really horrible, and your friends will sympathize with you. If you're a sex worker and you go to your friends and say, oh, I had a really horrible day at work, like I had this client, it was awful, they'll say, well, why don't you quit sex work? Well, that's not, you know, financially viable for a lot of people. You might not have other options, you might need the flexibility of the hours, you might not have a legal status that allows you to get another job, so it can be very difficult for you to just get another job. So it can feel very silencing as well. There's not always a sense of community, and that can feel very difficult. Sometimes I've experienced, even within sex worker communities, very cliquishness that can be very difficult. And I would say probably the hardest thing and the most frustrating is a very media-fed impression that sex workers cannot have intimate relationships. I ended up doing this report on sex work in media and how they have relationships, and so many sex worker relationships in media have them basically having to break up with their partner or having to give up sex work. And they always have to make a choice between the sex work or their partner. And so there's sort of this constantly fed idea that, you know, I am a sex worker, so I cannot love, I cannot give my heart to anyone. And that's total bullshit. But if anyone you ever date believes that and feeds into that, it can be very difficult to find a partner who can get where you're coming from and live with this reality and be a supportive partner to you and hear your complaints about your work without giving the whole, like, well, why don't you quit sex work? However, they do exist, and they're really awesome when you find them. It can be really amazing to work with a client and watch them grow as a person. I've had clients who had debilitating social anxiety when they met me and were able, through seeing me and learning how to sit in a room with a girl and have a conversation and cuddle and go out on a date to a restaurant without freaking out. were able to have girlfriends. And that's amazing, you know? Like, it's so sweet to me and like so heartwarming to me to see that happen. When I was working in London, I learned to love my body with an intensity that I never could have felt in the US because there was such body hatred here. In the UK, I had so many clients who just had such a love and respect for my body and just treated me with so much honor that because sex work is legal there, I think is a huge part of it, and because they are not as against fat bodies as they are here, that I ended up developing an amazing amount of self-esteem, and it made sex work into a really pleasurable job for me as opposed to just another job. I learned a lot about boundaries in sex work. I learned how to say no in a bunch of different ways, going from friendly to extremely direct. And that was really helpful to me. I think that learning about boundaries and consent has helped me a lot as an activist and helped me learn a lot when it came to founding SafeWord. Having my parents accept my sex work was really valuable in us developing a closer relationship. My parents and I didn't get along very well when I was growing up, but when I came out to them as a sex worker, which I was terrified to do because so many of my friends who came out to their parents had lost any kind of relationship with their parents, and my parents were really supportive and really amazing to me. We now have an incredibly close, really amazing relationship, and I think that talking about sex work really helped. They started to really honor my decisions as an adult. So sex work really helped with that. And everything, I mean, I joke about this all the time, but literally everything I know about social media came from being a sex worker and having to do all of my marketing myself. So now that I do social media for 2 television shows on the side, it's kind of awesome to have developed those skills through being a sex worker.
I think I shared this earlier, but I think my first introduction to the world of sex work was growing up in suburban New Jersey, outside of New York City, in a very conservative town, and having been born in New York, always wanting to go back to New York, especially as I was going through the college process as a teenage gay boy in New Jersey. At the time, there was a very visible club scene going on in New York City, which was also we didn't have social media back then, 20 years ago, but shows like Joan Rivers and Sally Jessy Raphael, and it became this, longing, or, I kind of felt this connection where it would be safe to be who I am by being in this scene. And, having gone at the age of 16, met lots of sex workers, LGBTQ identified folks, male sex workers, trans sex workers in the club scene. So I think the sense of community and acceptance is really something very positive that I took from that experience from the very beginning. With what Kitty had alluded to before, certainly there are, if not all, daisies and sunshine within activist and advocacy work that we do. But in college, I started getting involved in community organizing around LGBTQ issues and HIV prevention, which was very much connected to sex work, and still had lots of sex workers in my life to this very day, but since I was a young kid. And that work led me to become a social worker, and I worked for a group home, foster care group home for LGBTQ youth after I finished my MSW, and that was kind of the first time that I really saw the less glamorous side of sex work, especially working with trans youth of color, in particular trans women, young people, who were engaging in sex work and experiencing some pretty horrific forms of violence, and reporting this to me as a newly minted 25-year-old social worker, and it was, you know, kind of very difficult in terms of accessing resources and providing support, and you know, kind of maneuvering through systems when they're engaging in an activity that is illegal and they're already part of so many different marginalized identities. They're foster care youth, they're trans youth, they're youth of color. So it was very eye-opening, especially as a cisgender white man, to kind of see the different side of that. But even as, and I mentioned this before, even with those stories that I can think back on, there was still this sense of community that many of the trans youth at Green Chimneys experienced through doing sex work, even though they were often in very high-risk situations. And as my work has progressed, what we see in our research is that trans women of color experience disproportionate rates of violence and are often experiencing those forms of violence while engaged in sex work. So it's a very ugly side of the issue, and I think that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. So, you know, I'm hoping to see one day where there would be an end to that violence and that stigma.
So I've been doing organizing professionally for about the past 7 years. And I started out doing labor organizing, and then did a lot of other different types of organizing, such as prison abolition organizing, anti-racism organizing, and LGBTQ organizing. And coming to sex work organizing, one of the things I like so much about it is I get to deal with all of these issues, because these are populations where all these issues often intersect. The criminalization of a lot of the sex work professions, the fact that trans women of color and people of color are more likely to go into sex work, and to be criminalized for doing so. And, you know, this is the reason why I enjoy my work so much, and it's also the reason sometimes why my work can be so hard for me, is reading about the things that these people go through, and particularly just as a trans woman who is often part of these communities, who knows a lot of the people that these sort of things happen to. It breaks my heart to have to hear it day after day. But I find it really important for me to be able to step back and say, but this isn't happening to me. I'm still just reading this happening. But things like it did happen to me, especially when I lived in Virginia before I moved to New York City, in terms of both harassment for being an open trans woman and also harassment by the police. So I definitely feel a certain amount of connection as well. And it also, my work allows me to deal with those parts of my personal history in ways that I feel are productive.
Katie touched on this a little, but I guess I want anyone who's comfortable to talk about how they balance their job and their personal relationships. Let's see. Well, I guess admittedly I didn't do a lot of dating when I was a sex worker. And the dating I did do, it was complicated, I won't lie. It was really hard to find partners who were okay with me stripping, and yeah, that was kind of hard. But I felt at that time of my life it was kind of hard to balance everything, like living in a new city that I was unfamiliar with, just trying to establish roots and connections and find a sense of community. And the sex industry, while I met some really wonderful people, can be a highly dysfunctional place to meet friends. So I had a really hard time within that realm as well. And I guess I will take this opportunity to also disclose that I'm a recovering addict. So during my time as a sex worker, I was an active alcoholic and addict. So I wasn't making the best choices in terms of partners and lifestyle and friends. And but I mean, I also work with women who were married, who had loving, long-term relationships, and that was very inspiring for me. But for me at that time, I was just not in a place to really be able to have anything remotely healthy going on.
For me, when I first started dancing, I was already with my boyfriend for about 1.5 years, and he supported me doing it. He knew I was only in it for the money, not to go find a new boyfriend. I didn't need to go and take my clothes off at a strip club to find a new boyfriend, I'll tell you that. So that wasn't really an issue for us. The only issue that ever came up was just the scheduling, working until 1 a.m., not getting home until 2 o'clock, and then, being exhausted, taking a shower, not waking up till 1 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, sometimes, if I was that exhausted. That was the main, I wouldn't even call it a conflict, but the main thing that annoyed him was like, come on, like, get up, like, let's go to the beach, let's do something fun. And I'm like, screw you, I'm tired. That was our main conflict. And also, I don't take very well to having bad nights. And if I came home and all pissed off that I didn't make the amount of money I wanted to, he would just be upset about that, which is reasonable, We already complain about enough stuff to our boyfriends, so I think that would be the main conflict. And as far as other relationships, my parents just found out that I've been dancing. They found out 2 months ago, and they were very upset. But I think they've kind of figured out that I'm not doing it because I'm a bad person. I'm not doing it to serve any psychological need. It's just a job, and it's no different than any other job. We all play a role at our job at some point. You have to be nice to people. You have to put up with people, and I honestly, I used to have a job as a Jaeger girl, doing the promotions, and I would get so much more disrespect in one single night doing Jägermeister than I've ever gotten the whole time I've been dancing. And so I think that's another big thing.
Yeah, I have never had any intimate relationship while I've been dancing or being a sex worker. I do think that it's very complicated. I don't think people completely understand. They can definitely be, I think, like almost a jealousy thing, I guess, is a problem. It's sad to say. My parents do know. They have been very, very supportive. They weren't at first, but I almost feel like they've kind of seen me grow in a way through it. I think it's really hard for me to find like close friends. That's probably where I've struggled the most, because there's not a lot of people that can understand this job, and I almost feel sometimes people are almost scared of it or don't like the fact that you do it. And then also, I mean, feminism has become a huge part of me, I think. And I think that also people get scared of that. So it's almost like got two really big things. I agree with a lot of what you said about addiction. I think that's almost become my relationship. I mean, I'm a lot better now. I did have to go into rehab, and I'm definitely a lot better. But I almost think that this industry gets you so open to that. And it was like for a long time, I didn't have anyone close, and that was what was close to me. I guess still can be. So yeah, I think having close relationships is what's the hardest for me. Friendships, intimate relationships. even with my family, I mean, yes, my parents are incredible, but when it comes to aunts, uncles, cousins, they don't, everyone pretty much knows and they don't like that, so I have lost a lot of contact with people. So yeah, it can be hard.
Well, as I said, my parents know, and that wasn't really a big deal. I don't really talk to my uncle and aunt or anything anyway, so that wasn't really a problem. For other reasons, I just don't really like them. They're conservative sports fans who live in Ohio. It wasn't going to work out anyway. My grandma knows. That was really interesting. She lives in California, so it was not going to work to try to hide it from her anyway. And I think I had thought that she knew for a really long time because I had never hidden it from her, and I was very open with her. And like she would, like I had told her I was taking like a class to learn how to be a better dominant. And she was like, oh, didn't you know enough about that anyway? So like I thought that like we were pretty clear, but she hadn't like looked it up on the internet, and apparently she looked up my work name on the internet and saw a bunch of photos of me dressed as like a sex clown, and she got really upset. And it took me a really long time to figure out what the problem was, and it turned out that she thought I wasn't taking sex seriously. So I had to sit down and explain to her that, like, while I understood how she felt about